Hey everyone, today I'm here with Jack Thorn, the writer and creator of the action comedy story The Reprobates. How's things?
Great. Co-writer. Have to
Co-writer.
correct. Yeah, co-writer. I'll get my butt kicked if I don't.
That's completely fair. Credits where credits due.
Yep.
So let's dive right in. Tell me about The Reprobates.
So The Reprobates is a graphic novel, comic book, whatever you want to call it, about a bunch of scumbags, but they have good hearts. And the basic kind of setup is the main character, our hero, Tam McGrussel. He's made a bit of a whoopsie, and he needs to repay the leader of his gang on a drug deal that went wrong. So he has to recover quite a hefty sum of money in a pretty unreasonable amount of time. And there are some twists and turns and some laughs along the way. And yeah, that's the kind of the pitch for the story.
It sounds really good. So, I mean, where did the name come from?
Well, the name, I guess, in the kind of modern sense, a reprobate, you would just call anybody who's a bit of a scumbag, you would just call a reprobate. So yeah, it was a word that we just found quite funny. Um, back in the day, we would call each other it, as an insult. But then we did a bit of research into the actual word. And it's actually pretty interesting because it's a sort of biblical term, and it's not just it actually goes a bit deeper. This is what I found really fascinating was that it's not just sort of someone who's, a dirtbag. They actually like are unable to be good. So it's they're sort of cursed in a way. Like they're kind of cursed to be a scumbag. And the reason we found that really fascinating was because so like if they're cursed to act that way by God or whoever, it's almost like if you're writing a story you're telling them you're in control of what they say and do. So like it's kind of not they act how, as a work of fiction, they're acting how they're written to act. So I was like, that's a happy sort of, a happy accident there. Like started off just a word we found funny, but it actually does mean something a bit deeper. Okay, great, yeah. It was kind of accidental, but it worked in our favor.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly never knew that about the word. Again, it was always a word that was just tossed around.
Hmm.
Growing up, it was definitely a word that your parents always, never say that. But yeah, it's nice to kind of find that
We
actually.
kids drinking in the park, but all these reprobates, and it's
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
that's sort of
Um,
what it means in our modern context.
yeah. And I suppose how do you think that would fare kind of I suppose in like the age of like PC culture, like there's certain words you're not allowed to say anymore. Like was it kind of deliberate to t try and be tongue in cheek, or was it just you kind of
A little bit. I mean, yeah, it's sort of. It's such an interesting topic. Like, so I went to art school, obviously, and you can imagine like everyone was uber woke and all that type of stuff, and it's like there's a big difference between making a point because you have a point to make and being offensive because you just are a prick and feel like hurting people's feelings, you know. So like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes on as far as what they call each other and stuff like that. And a bit of a point that we kind of wanted to make as well was people really, again, these are fictional characters that we're writing. What they say doesn't necessarily mean what I say. So, just remember that as well. Like I had a few debates with people. They're saying like, "Oh no, because everything is everything is autobiographical. It's always a representation of yourself." And I'm like, "No, it's not. Like if I write a story where about a serial killer, that doesn't mean I'm a serial killer. You know what I mean? But if I write a story where someone uses a homophobic slur, that means that's the way I think." I'm like, "No, I don't agree with that. I think that's a bit redundant." And again, it's all about how you frame it. The people that we have doing, the people in the story that are doing bad things are the bad guys. We're not saying like, oh, this guy is, beating people up. What a great guy. It's like, no, he's the villain. That's the point. You're not meant to like him. So chill. Like, uh,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know if I made my point there, but
Yeah, no, I think it ties into something. I've had a couple conversations over the past few interviews that I've done about things like AI culture and how like the
Mm-hmm.
modern world is really changing, whether it's in music or just art in general. And it's an interesting point that you make in terms of how movies from like the 80s and the 90s, they would come out and we would never take that tone with them. We would never assume that, all these big directors reflected the characters that they wrote
Mm-hmm.
about. And yet somehow in this day and age, that's the first thing that we think about. Um, and obviously, I mean, the Reprobates obviously has some strong connotations to Scottish like drug culture or just Scottish culture in general, the side that
Yeah.
perhaps we don't like to paint.
Mm-hmm.
What prompted you to kind of go down that alley, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, we're both both of the writers. We're both very into punk rock, and it's kind of got a bit of a, I don't know if stigma is even the right word, but everybody knows about the stories about like Sid Vicious, dying young. Rock music in general, like the whole 27 Club and everything, there's always been a bit of a sort of culture around that. Again, with me being at art school, there's a lot of people. I personally have never partook, but that's not a judgment or anything. I had some people engaging in the kind of recreational drugs, and I found it quite interesting being kind of on the outside watching them. I'll drink alcohol here and there, but I've never taken anything else. But I've seen people just rambling and talking absolute nonsense and doing things like mushrooms and stuff like that, and I'm like, I do and I don't sort of see the appeal because they're completely out of their minds. But in some ways, I'm like, I wonder what they're seeing right now. I wonder what they're, are they seeing like between the lines and uh the what reality really is, and I'm missing out. Or but then there's other times I'm like, you're just talking nonsense and jaws swinging about the place and everything like that. So and then you get into like, so that's kind of recreational drug use. These are grown-ups doing as they please. I don't partake, but as long as everybody's safe and all that crap, then I don't have too much of a problem with it. But then there's obviously the negative side of like addiction, and it ruins people's lives when they get too into this type of stuff. So again, it's trying to not be preachy, but it's stuff that goes on, and I don't think we should not talk about it. Um, it's not me or us, making like any sort of judgment. It's kind of like, this is just what they do. Um, yeah, it's like what we can't shy away from it. I mean, it happens. So, and again, I feel like the sort of a lot of it's presented negatively. I mean, the main characters like he deals, but he, it's sort of presented in a negative way. It's presented in a like, you don't want to be this way, kids. Steer clear of this type of stuff. Just say no and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, and you made an interesting point about how, like, you went to art school and you seen this kind of side of the culture. I also went to art school and I also seen the way that kind of
Right.
like I studied sound and it really
Which one? Which art school?
in Glasgow,
Glasgow. All right, great, great.
and it seemed that when they were you would present your kind of topics, you would have to kind of like defend your project or whatever it was.
Hmm.
And it's quite funny because a lot of them, there would be a few people that they would partake in these psychedelics or whatever else, and you could see how heavily it would inform their work. Whether it was like they listened to trance music or whatever, and it
Hmm.
just always seemed that they had like an extra insight into stuff.
Oh,
Um,
really?
but yeah, it's interesting to see how like the different, the other side of the fence, if you like, and trying to see it from their perspective. Um,
Hmm.
and you guys have a Kickstarter on the go. What has the journey been like to get this project off the ground? I know right now Scotland is struggling, with funding, etc., for the creative arts.
Hmm. But when has it not been? I mean,
True.
but yeah, it's been hit and miss. I mean, making the project, making the book is the easy part. It's getting people to pay attention because like sort of um, you know, oh, why should I care? You've only got 10 followers. I'm like, well, everybody starts at 10 followers. Like, that's how you get somewhere. And I've been using social media and all that stuff, which I mean, me personally, I hate it. I like it. Just it makes me want to jump off a bridge most of the time. And a lot of these, so a lot of the comic based sort of art pages I'm on, so many of them are no one there is like from the UK for whatever reason, which I'd like to think the book doesn't, it's not, I don't think it could only be read like in the UK and enjoyed over here. I think it could be enjoyed anywhere, but it's kind of getting people to pay attention to it has really been the biggest, I suppose it's the biggest struggle for anybody. Um, Comic-Con last year we were there, and this might sound mad, but Comic Cons are really not a good place for comics anymore. Like it's the place for people were like, "Oh, what's that? Is that a comic?" I was like, "Yeah." They were like, "Oh, that's weird." I'm like, "What? It says Comic Con on the door." I think it was MCM Comic Con. I'd need to double check that. They're more anime and sort of movies and video games and everything apart from comics. Convention is sort of what they should be called. Um, so that was okay. It was fun, but yeah, it was like I've had conversations with people as well, and another big sort of roadblock, which makes no sense to me, is people say like some of my good friends as well. I'm like, I'll read my comic. They're like, oh, I'm not into comics. I'm like, okay, how come? They're like, oh, I don't like cunts flying about and superpowers and all that shit. I'm like, there's none of that in here. Like, what do you mean? And I guess that's to do with like sort of Marvel and DC, like the big companies, especially like with the Marvel films and what have you. I think some people think comic books are just that superhero genre. And like, don't get me wrong, I love superhero comics. I've got too many Batman and Nightwing comics, frankly. But it's like when people say, "Oh, I'd never read a comic," it's like that's like saying I'd never watch a film, I'd never listen to a song. Like superhero stuff is one genre. There's crime and romance and all that. It's just a different medium of telling your story. Um, so yeah, that's another roadblock is people that you go watch your favorite film and they go, "Oh, Avengers Endgame," and you go, "All right, read my comic." They go, "No, I'm not into comics." It's like, well, you've never read one, number one, and I don't get it. You've just said your favorite film ever is based on a comic book, so I don't know. It's daft, but that's a roadblock that uh, we're still sort of fighting over that, and yeah, just getting eyes on it, getting attention. We're confident if people read it, they're gonna like it, or they're gonna hate it to the point where they're like, "I hated that. Let's read the next one." But yeah, so it's just getting eyes on any project is just kind of always the hard part. I'm sure anybody would kind of agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose kind of any, even bad press is good press,
Yeah.
to some degree. But I mean, what made you want to take it in the direction of a comic in the first place? Why that particular medium?
I guess sort of a handful of reasons. I mean, like I say, I've been reading comic books, since before it was cool. And, so yeah, I mean, I've always been into them. I've always wanted to draw comic books. I guess where it really started, so my sort of final year project at art school, I made a short film. It's atrocious, but it's quite funny. It's a sort of it's almost like the way I described it is, have you ever seen This Is Spinal Tap?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So imagine like Spinal Tap meets The In-Betweeners was kind of what I was going for. So it's like a sort of mockumentary about this sort of little punk band and just their shenanigans, and the basic story is just they're looking for a new singer. So it's them auditioning singers and shenanigans and so. And so that was great. And the band in it, they're called the Reprobates, right? Um so that I guess was like the sort of the genesis of the idea. And then we talked about films are just so difficult. There's so many moving parts. I mean, this was a 20-minute short film and it was like a nightmare. It took months to you need to get everybody there and this in the right place at the right time. And then they show up the next day and they're wearing different clothes and even though it's meant to be the same scene and so it just seemed a lot more, I guess, feasible. I don't want to say easy because it's not like it's easy to make a comic, but it's more feasible in terms of if you've got a bit of paper and you're able to draw it, you can draw whatever you can think of. Whereas, like I said, like if you're making a film, if you want Godzilla to show up, all right, well, if you got 40 million quid that we can, go CG that in, if you do, no problem, but I don't. So that's why we thought like a comic you can just, yeah, if it's there, if it's in your head, you can draw it, you can make it happen. And from there, I guess it was just a case of yeah, just figuring out the story. And there's some I think really interesting stuff going on about sort of the process itself, because we started talking about what can you do with a comic that you can't do with anything else. And one of the things we kind of came up with was pretty much like your perception of time is a bit different. Like if you watch a film, you watch it start to finish. And if you're reading a book, you sit and you read it start to finish, but it's a physical object in your hands. So like it's a lot more feasible to sort of flick back a few pages. There's like a physical sort of feedback there. So we thought that was kind of interesting. We wanted some moments where you go, wait a minute, is that, such and such from earlier on? Like everything you draw, you sit and you draw deliberately and you're taking time and effort to put it in there. So we want things kind of in the background, things going on that later on are relevant, and then you can go back and you can see it. Because you can do that with a film, but if you're at the cinema, you've no control. It's just playing. And realistically, I don't think a lot of people watching films go, hang on a second, and rewind it and go back 20 minutes. That's why a lot of films will do that thing where they show a flashback. But I find that a bit sort of insulting at times. It's a bit like, oh hey, remember this from an hour ago? It's like, yeah, I remember it was only an hour ago. Um, so yeah, I mean that's we just took it from there, and we're both big fans of Watchmen, and Watchmen does a lot of that. I don't know if you've ever read it, where it's things like the pages will be mirrored right the way through. So you're looking at the first page, it reflects the last page and things like that, which is, it's I wouldn't say it's only possible with a comic, but it's something that works best with a comic. Because again, it's like the way you read it and the way you go through it's a bit different from other mediums. So I thought we should really try and make as much use of the medium as we can. Don't see it as inferior to a film, for example, or anything like that, because it's not. It's just a bit different. Yeah.
That's actually really interesting. I've not read many comics, but I've certainly also never thought of comics in that sense.
Mm.
And yeah, that's a really interesting way to kind of like challenge the medium. And it sounds like you guys have had, quite a few challenges along the way. And one of the kind of topics that keeps coming up every interview that I have is imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
There ever been a point where you've been like, nope, I'm out, like that it's too much almost?
Yeah. Mm, I've never been thinking, nope, I'm out, but I've been thinking, maybe this is just you know, for me and like five people to read. Maybe this isn't for everybody type of thing. I mentioned Comic Con. I mean, that was, I just felt like, what am I even doing here? Kind of like getting ignored by everybody. And I was at the artist alley bit, and they all have their setups and fireworks and shit going on, and we just hadn't really thought about any of that. It was literally just a blank table with it was a scrap of paper, with like $2 on it next to like the comics. It was that was definitely some imposter syndrome right there. I was like, what are we? We're a bit out of our depth. We did not know what we're doing here. But now we've been there, seen that, and learned. So next time I don't know, we'll hire some like someone to juggle fire or some shit to get people to come pay attention.
And I mean, you kind of touched on it there, but like, how did you deal with that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, just take it on the chin and sort of, because it was an experience. I didn't feel like it was like we're not our work is bad. I feel like it was a naivety from like a lack of experience, from sort of not really knowing your not quite knowing the audience, and definitely not quite knowing the what's the word I'm looking for, environment, I guess, so that it's there. And then when you're selling, if you're trying to sell stuff online, I knew nothing about the environment. Trying to do the Kickstarter, that all fell on me, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was sort of, it's maybe an element of build it and they will come,
Mhm.
but no, you need to go promote everything. So yeah, I guess you just try and put your ego to one side and sort of go, all right, well, take it on the chin. We'll learn. We'll do better next time, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the Kickstarter there, so it's been out for a couple of years now. What has the process looked like from start to finish? Like from the day that you thought of the idea that let's do a comic, kind of up
Mhm.
until recently.
Um, Sorry, what, could you say that again?
What would you say that like what has your process looked like from the day that you thought of the comic, like let's do
Oh,
this,
right.
up until now?
Um, yeah, I mean, it was pretty much we work in people call it the Marvel method. So like, she writes the story, and I get that, and then I draw it, and then she puts in the dialogue last, with a few exceptions. Sometimes there's the deliberate dialogue. So that's the process as far as like creatively, as far as like getting getting the Kickstarter done and all that. I mean, I looked at other ones, both successful and unsuccessful, saw kind of what they did and what they didn't do, and you just kind of have to do your research. Um, I was on, I reached out to some people from art school and things like that, and I was like, "Oh, you've done this before, what advice have you got?" All that kind of good stuff. So it's sometimes you just need to shout until someone listens, I suppose. Um, and yeah, just wait and see, and hopefully this time we're thinking of launching quite soon. We don't have an exact date, but before the end of the month, I would like to, because it's one of those things. It's just like 2 years has gone by, and we're like, we've still not kind of launched this. So yeah, let's get a move on and try and get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I know quite a few people with Kickstarters and all in kind of varying degrees of, about to release, nowhere near release, and it definitely sounds like one of the more challenging aspects of trying to
Mhm.
get a project off the ground. And I suppose in talking about that, has there been anything that's cropped up along the road? I know that you mentioned things like Comic-Con, things that you just didn't see coming.
Um, I'm trying to think. It's not particularly, I guess. Just the complete. Some people just have the total lack of interest from some people, where these are like using Facebook, for example. It's like these are pages. It's like, uh show us your comic book, show us what you're working on, then you show it, and they're like, why are you showing me that? It's like, you just asked. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's a lot.
Difficult, I guess. Just yeah.
Yeah, no, people definitely are sometimes the actual creation of the work itself is fine, that comes completely naturally, but I think when you try and put it out into the world, it's a lot harder. And you
Mhm.
mentioned, you're hoping to get this Kickstarter done by the end of the month. What, apart from that, like what's kind of next on the cards? Once we release the Kickstarter, what do you envision coming next?
I mean, as far as I know, like there's a whole epic, saga for these guys planned, that we're kind of building towards. But in the shorter term, I would love to, I don't know, just I'd like this to be my career. I'd like to move more towards illustration as a career. I work in sort of graphic design and that type of stuff at the moment, which is way better than working at Starbucks like I used to. But it's okay. It's okay. So yeah, that's long term what I'd hope this can kind of lead to. Just getting it in front of the right sort of eyes who have that kind of reach. Hope that would be next on the cards, but we'll see. You don't have Jim Lee's phone number, do you?
I don't know,
Oh,
unfortunately.
well, there you go. Well, me neither. So, you know, if
I will,
anybody does, then feel free to give it to me. So,
I'll send them your way. I'll send them
yeah,
your way.
yeah,
No, I bet we wish we all had someone's phone number.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, all that sounds really exciting. And I look forward to it. I'm definitely going to keep an eye out on the Kickstarter.
yeah.
Because I watched the trailer. I'll also include that in the interview because it
Oh,
sounds,
sweet, yeah.
it looked really cool actually. I'd love to see it when it comes out.
Mm.
But yeah, no, apart from that, thank you very much for taking the time out to come on and chat. Um, yeah, I hope to see you next time.
Great. Thanks so much.